roll. TV land. All right, so quick visual reminder. Hopefully everybody's watched this. These are actually student examples, as I kind of said in the intro and the hello message. So this week, starting your change of direction. Can't quite call this a block out. We'll just call this a quick rough, your first pass of a block out, okay? So that's all you're required to do is get your steps in place, bring in your reference. Want you guys kind of working from the reference. That's the whole idea of this this project too, is to get a little bit used to the understanding of how to properly use your reference. You're not here to copy it. You're here to learn from it, and you're here to animate with the knowledge that you're going to learn from how the actions are happening and the types of actions you're trying to create. Okay. So right now we're just going to be putting in our contact poses to lay out really the path of action of how your character is going to walk through your scene. Okay. Choose a shot camera. There's 4 shot cameras there, and stage your character specifically for that shot camera. Okay. Oops. Also this week, and really this is kind of the main this is the animation of the week, is we're going to be actually hopping Bob through those same footsteps, bouncing him off of the poles. Okay, so I'll talk a little bit obviously about both of these and go over them. Actually, I'm going to spend most of my time on this because this is really, again, where hopefully I can point out to you guys the importance of the reference and how to really properly use it, because at the end of the day, that hashtag, think like an animator idea that I throw around in the videos is sort of the main goal of this this month, is to get you guys thinking more and understanding how to analyze, understand, deconstruct how to create these motions, which is going to allow you to think about how to break down your actions and create any action that you need to. So I'm going to come back to this in a bit, but let's see. All right, so Stephanie is excited about this project. It must be the Bob thing, right? This is obviously a much more complicated piece of animation than you did with the jump. Okay, your character choreographing sort of the whole performance along with the steps and the change of direction and being a little bit more less in the box, you might say. Is going to kind of challenge you guys again to be a better problem solver about how to create these actions. There's not the same answer for any video that you're working from. What am I looking for? I'm looking to turn off cameras. There we go. Okay. So I don't even think this is on the video. I think I just did this after I kind of set up the videos, but I just impaled our poor character. Kind of to point out the idea too that this is about mechanics, right? Understanding how to choreograph those body parts, the character's torso and body through these actions, and this is really part of what you should be like focusing on for your original block out here, is trying to establish a good strong pose, obviously, to start with, and every contact and the mechanics that are in play, which is all about that idea of the use of contrapposto and how you're tilting your body parts in order to create the shapes that you need to in the action that you need to create. Okay. Obviously, where the actual weight lies too is pretty important here too. That's what that yellow sort of impaled thing going through his body is all about. Again, looking at the reference and really seeing that the bulk and mass of the body is being supported by that left leg. Okay. The rule of thumb with that is that the leg you're standing on is usually the leg that pushes up that hip to keep that hip higher that you're standing on. So it's usually your higher hip. The other one will normally drop because it's not supporting you, and it's kind of pulling down a little bit more, and that's what creates the tilts in your body in this case. And if you're looking at your reference, you can normally see that kind of progression here as far as that squash side in the torso, and then that stretch side on the other side. And as soon as you kind of understand and establish that, you can realize that by tilting your hips this way and countering your body this way, you're going to get a little bit more of that direction in your pose in the torso, okay? Obviously, that's rotate Z with your character's hips. There's also rotate Y and rotate X, so kind of looking at this, it's a little harder to distinguish what's going on maybe with the twist in Y and X from this point of view. But obviously you can really kind of keep in mind your foot placement when you're thinking about the rotate Y that goes through your body, right? If this foot is more forward, depending on which one you decide is more forward, actually, the way I built this here, I kind of disagree with it, but kind of think the right foot should be a little bit more back here, looking at that reference, and that other foot is slightly more forward. Let's see what happens. We're going to take that step. It really actually wouldn't matter much anyway. Actually, I could probably even decide to change this and say I could start with this a little bit more back. And if I decided that was more my pose, well then at this point too, that leg is back farther back, then my hip would probably be pushing a little bit more back this way, right? Because you want your hip pointing in the same direction that your foot is, in the direction of your foot, right? So then I have to take my spine and kind of reverse my character's spine a little bit more this way to straighten him out, okay? I'll go back to sort of my shot camera here and try and get my character a little bit back into that idea of pointing in the right place, in the right direction as far as staging here. That looks a little better. Okay, so the rotate Y, obviously that plays for the body too. You want to play those two off. If I've got my hips rotating back this way, then a little twist in the torso to create that, create the actual twist through the midsection. Rotate X is the other one, and this one it's really hard to kind of tell. But for me, if I'm looking at this, I see a little bit of slumping, you know, through the reference like this, you know. When you kind of think of that, you think of, well, I can kind of see, you know, the top of the shoulders. So is the rib cage tilted a little bit more this way, right, towards us, which would make me then tilt my hips a little bit back this way to kind of bend them more this way and get a little bit more of that line that we're seeing there, okay? So that's what we have here. That rotate, pushing the hips more up, and then crunching the upper spine down into that a little bit more, okay? Now, once again, I mentioned this in the intro to the rig, to go over the rig. If you guys didn't watch that and you want more information about the rig, I go over the foot controls in depth in that. I talk about the choices in the actual character's hip controls, which is making me wonder if I should open up the other rig, because I set up the controls a little bit differently, color coded them differently, and now these are the old version. And the color coding is different on the feet, but the same controls exist. I'm going to ask you guys to, bear with me on that. It's pretty much all the same three controls. So whether you guys decide to animate your rotates on your character's hips with the main control, and that's called the root control, that's the yellow one that's on the rig, so I've made that predominant because that is the main control. You have to translate your character with that one anyhow, right? That's kind of the main one I use, and I play those off each other. That's what I was just doing now, right? Tilting the hip up, which makes the upper body move, and then you have to counter it back this way, okay? If for some reason you guys are using the other hip control, whether it's the one below it and it's light blue, that's called more of an independent hip control. And the one thing I don't like about this, this rig specifically, is that notice when I kind of rotate it, it kind of moves the upper body. It translates the upper body. Sure, it's going to move the legs, and that makes sense because they're attached to the hips, and that's going to happen. But why is it tugging on the upper body? Actually, I'm not a big fan of using this one for that reason, because I feel like it's just going to be nudging my upper body out of the character. So the other one on the side here, this one that is easy to kind of wonder why it's there, If you select that one, that pretty much does the same thing, and it rotates the hips independently. But as you can see, it does not tug on the upper body, okay? So if you're one of those people who prefers to use the independent hip control to create your rotates in your performance, this is the one I suggest you use, okay? If you're using the main control, then obviously you're using the main control and you're countering with the upper body. The only problem I don't like about this one too is if you use the independent controls, sometimes it's harder to get nicer bends in your stomach and your, that core that you want to feel bend and you want to see bend. So it's harder to get those squash sides and stretch sides because you're not countering. When you take your character's hips and push them up and then counter the upper body down, now you get a very clear indication of where something's squashing and where something's stretching, right, in the torso. If you're using the independent one, maybe not so much, okay? One thing I'll say, depending on what you decide to use, the idea is not to overpose the character, meaning using, like, in this case too, I see a lot of students not pay attention, and what they'll do is if they push this hip up in Z with the main control, and then they come over here and they push it back down with this control. Now they got one control that's saying, hey, rotate my hips up, and you got another one that's trying to point your hips down that way. So now you have two controls moving your hips in opposite directions, and the chances that you're going to get any kind of smooth motion out of that are pretty slim, right? Okay, so much like most things in the rig, if you have a control that overlaps another control, if you can use one or the other, you should stick to it. Sometimes you do overlap, but if you don't have to, you should avoid it. But don't be silly about that and have these things competing to try and create a pose, all right? Same thing goes for the foot controls. In the video, I kind of talk about the individual controls and ask you guys to use those this month with me because they're a lot more, they give you a lot more control of how that foot hits the ground, from what angle, and how it peels and peels on, flops onto it and peels off of it, okay? With the actual channels that are in here, the roll channel, oops, that is zeroed out, but with the roll channel, your character's foot only rotates in what would be rotate X, like straight up or down, okay? It's good if you're walking straight ahead, but since we're not taking just a straight step ahead, we're taking a step, in this case too, if I just click over here, I'm taking a step forward and to the right, so I don't want necessarily that foot to hit so straight. This is where having the option to tilt it this way or rock it in whatever way you want with that back control is going to make this much more organic of a step. Do you want to crack the ankle a little bit? Do you want to hit more on from this angle as you come in, or that angle, or obviously you can go straight on too, but gives you much more control, okay? Obviously I'm still using the foot channel, the toe channel on this to drag the foot as the foot comes down, okay? Same thing here. I'm using the middle independent control on that foot to be able to not just bend this thing up like this, like the roll channel will. That's pretty broken, right? You guys can see that broken ankle. If I'm coming off to the side here, it's going to pull the foot in that direction, right? And those independent controls allow you to do that, okay? If you want to peel your character's foot off the front toe, you can switch from the ball in the middle and then start rolling him out this way, and then just take this and animate it back the opposite way and switch to that to really peel your character's foot off, okay? But like I said, just like the hips, use the independent, so then don't use the roll channel, okay? You can use a little bit of the rock channel if you wanted your character's foot to actually rock out of here also and hit more on the instep. That could be helpful, although it's a little flat and it's a little what you might call kind of rigid here, right? Because it comes up pretty flat. You can try and maybe, if you really wanted to try and finesse it a little bit, you could drop the toe a little bit just so it's not so stiff. But you could use that in tandem a little bit too, and that can help if your foot is peeling off from the side, right? But at the end of the day too, it's always about you guys. You've got to just understand how you're posing your characters, get familiar with your rig more. You've all been using this rig for the 3rd month now. You should be aware of the basic use of the rig, and you should be able to start thinking a little bit more thoughtful about your choices and how you're building these poses. And that's all part of your block out, is to block this out and be smart about how you're constructing and what you're constructing the poses with, okay? Just looking even at mechanics here too, which we'll kind of look a little bit more at in a sec. You can see all the contrapposto where the, this leg is over here, this hip is opening up out there. Body's kind of pointing a little bit more this way. The head obviously is kind of working with what's going on here and looking in that direction. I'm still kind of leaning more forward here, even though I'm kind of rocking him a little bit more back than he was before. Because this really represents, and I could probably even push this a little bit more if I wanted by taking the spine and just really kind of dragging. The more I do that, right, the more I kind of push the idea of drag. That's really what's happening. I'm really leading with my leg here, right, to stretch out, and then my body will come back onto that leg after my arms and my upper body catches up around here about midpoint as I start to come up on that leg. So I want to suggest that. And that's really what the reference is about, building it right there side by side with the reference, is to be able to go back and forth and understand, the action and what's dragging and what's leading, what's following at this moment, okay? In this case too, for looking at the mechanics, I can really see a strong, line direction here as far as the body opening up this way, right? And that's when, again, if I'm trying to build this, I would really be keeping this hip that he's standing on up a little bit more as this hip drops a little bit to come in, which is counterintuitive to what you can see in the actual belt line here. But again, that is sort of, that could be part of the camera and the angle we're looking at, and that's just the shirt. So don't take the shirt line as the tilt of the actual hips. It's not necessarily that, okay? You've really got to think about this and how you're going to construct something to try and get the rhythm in what you're seeing. And that's the line, right? And the fluidity, and that has to do with how things are dragging, which is the upper body, how things leading here, how you're supporting yourself here with this hip being a little bit more rigid and staying up a little bit more, which gives you that, reason why this is going to feel more squashed and this is going to feel more stretched, okay? Along with the body opening up and dragging, even in X there. Contact here, body comes up, picks up my foot, and then I'm hitting the next contact. You can see right here again, I'm really supporting myself again with this leg as this hip drops slightly to reach in contact with the toe, okay, in this case. Now for your contacts too, guys, make sure that you're not keeping your feet flat. Obviously, when you're contacting the foot that's contacting the ground is usually going to hit, obviously, in the stretch with a heel, or if it's a side step or a back step, it could hit with the toe. But that's always going to tell that story too of the stretch in. But don't forget about the back foot, where the foot he's coming off of. That is still going to move a little bit. Okay, sometimes the heel peels up quite a bit, sometimes it just rolls a little bit, but don't keep that foot flat. Okay, so look for those contacts in this case too. Now I'm standing on this foot and I'm reaching to put this foot down at the toe, but this foot is still starting to walk a little bit in that direction. And that's really the idea, is that the body is starting to fall into the direction of it's laying its foot, right? That's placing its foot down, so it's going to, the body's going to pull in this direction, which is going to start pulling on this leg, which is going to make the heel sort of move in that direction. So that's why you want to start that and build that into your poses and think about when that happens. If you don't do that, you're going to wind up with pretty much shellacked feet that are going to feel like they're stuck to the ground too much, okay? And again, if you're trying to figure this stuff out too, obviously looking at the reference and scrubbing through and really focusing on what you see, that's part of what we're doing here. We're using the reference for that idea, but even getting up and figuring out yourself and doing that action and deciding how that's going to happen and looking at specific body parts and your weight and what you're doing, getting in the pose and feeling what it feels like, right? Okay, contact. So let me do this too. Actually, though, that's in a, that's really kind of in a podcast where I go over the reference review. So I kind of don't know if I should jump in there and go over reference. I'll be talking about that when I animate anyhow, so maybe I should just do that. So let's throw it out to you guys that are there. Do you have any questions about the blockout? I feel like, the blockout is the smaller part of the work to do here. As much as I want you guys to spend a lot of time, design your poses, build strong poses, you guys should be posing the whole character, keying the whole character as usual, posing the face, posing the fingers, designing all that stuff, staging it for the camera. So as much as you might only have about anywhere from 6 to 10 keys to create this week on this, they should be as best as you can do because you will be graded on them in such a way, okay? Standard mechanics, the standard staging, line of action, negative space. Okay. So if you finished yours, let me even show you this part of it too, which I'm sure is in a video somewhere, but doesn't hurt to kind of have it here. So looking at, wrong one, wrong keynote. When I had that other keynote, yes, there is. So this one, yeah, so I kind of think I have put this on a video somewhere. I think this is what this is from, but even for me, just the idea of, darn it, I hate when that happens. Go back. Okay. So I just like scrubbing through this again, just to kind of point. This is another good example of the use of reference as far as what to keep in mind. It's not about copying the reference, and most of us have a tendency to just copy what we see. That's not what I want you to do. So even when I block something out, if I've got reference in front of me, I tend to pull back on how I'm animating it and try and capture too much of what maybe I'm seeing. So my first pass of my poses are usually a little bit too stiff, and then I like to go back in there and actually just rework them a little bit. So here's just an example of me just drawing over this first or second pass of these poses to start thinking about how I could push them. Even when the character starts pulling up here to anticipate up, you can see me kind of just looking at the line of action and how I want to feel a bigger change of that sort of forward C here to reversing as the body reverses up here. As it starts to reverse back once again, you can even see that drag that I want to try and get through the body, through the head, through the torso, out even down the leg. You can see that, right? So just this is me animating as opposed to maybe the first pass where I was looking a little bit too rigidly. And two, for me, like when I pose a character, I'm thinking contrapposto and I'm tilting this and tilting this and tilting this. I'm kind of doing it very broadly just to go decide which way and what choices I'm making and what the torso is doing to make the line, right? And then I want to loosen it up because I want it to have that line of action, that strong line of action that goes through the whole pose, right? So this is me doing that with my pencil real quick, right? You can even see this. You can tell I'm really just animating it with lines right now, right? And gestures. So you can see that line that comes through the head, down through the torso, out the leg, even out the toe, right? You can see all the stuff going even through the arms. This one whips through and even cuts through and comes through this arm and comes out into that hand. So all that, that's what I want to feel. So for me, here I'm not really looking at my reference anymore. I'm looking at my poses, and I'm drawing over them and animating over them so that they're more in motion, okay? And they're set more to the action at hand. So here's me starting to push out. You can see that really pushing out that line because the energy is coming out my torso, out my hip, and pushing up that leg to kick out that leg. And there's my leg kicking up, and you're going to see, look at the big change. I'm deciding to kind of push to really exaggerate that leg to kick it out. And then that line that might shoot through because I'm pushing off the other leg, and it's going to come through and push out this leg, and I want to feel that more. I want to have fun and really drag and get a nicer stretch through here. Coming into the actual contact stretch, again, nice strong leg here. Drag that arm, maybe tuck that elbow a little bit and get a little bit more of that line, right? Squash here, and you can really see the squash and the weight jump forward and come onto this leg and squash into that leg here. Look at the line that comes through the leg, through the arm here, right? Boom, 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 okay? So those of you who have questions too about posing and how you're being graded, you can notice on the grading sheet that you get graded for mechanics, which is, are you making some decent choices about the contrapposto and building something that has that line, that has that support system, right? Based on what you know about, or you should know about, you know, how we're built, right? And stand and move. But this is the other one where you're looking in your shot camera and we're looking at, you know, the line of action, the movement, the staging, the negative space, and all that stuff, right? And this is an important part of your block out, is to make sure you just don't block it out and say it's done. It's not about that. Now it's about refining it and trying to bring it to the highest level you can before you animate it, okay? So this is me just going through and pushing the design, the line of action, to try and loosen up the poses. I always feel like my first block out is just a rough block out of getting basic mechanics and staging in, and then I need to work hard to try and make it look nice, okay, and feel nice, and start to think about moving it nicely. All right, and then for those of you who like to draw, it might be something you might want to try, because I did this in Maya with the grease pencil and right in my shot camera, so it's drawn right there, so I can just now readdress and rebuild those poses to try and get them a little bit more in line with my notes, okay? Okay, cool. Obviously, it all depends on, you know, where your skills are. You know, I've done a lot of drawing in my lifetime, and I learned animation through the 2D process. So I've always loved figure drawing and gesture drawing and stuff like that. So you go with your strengths, and I feel like I draw looser and more, you know, rhythmic than I pose. Posing to me is a little bit more mechanical, and my poses kind of suffer a little bit because of it. So if I'm trying to get my level to where it needs to be, I need to slow down and think more like this. So no, the program just doesn't have the time to really dive into 2D. We used to have one class just to introduce it to you, but even then we decided to change that out. Just we thought it was more beneficial to get you guys inside of Maya sooner. So if you want to learn 2D, you know, again, it's just a different tool. Obviously, with 2D though, you need to have a high level of draftsman skills too, which kind of gets in the way. Here, that's why we thought, do we waste time with you guys trying to use different tools, or would we rather have the same tools to train you with an animation? And that's why we only have 3D. But obviously, if you're a good animator, you could be a good 2D animator if you can draw. Again, it's like, you know, there's plenty of great 2D animators out there that don't animate so well in the computer because they don't have the technical skills needed. And as you guys are learning to control your rig, and you know, and be able to, you know, finesse it and stuff in the graph editor and all that, it takes some time to really get good at it. Okay, so you can just see me just doing some work here to start to put those poses into those notes, okay? Just an idea again, moving forward before you turn this in, obviously, you want your block out to be nice and strong before you animate it. And that's the idea behind that. All right. Yeah, there's the, they used to call, what is it called? I think I even put it on here and I haven't really started doing any work on it yet. It's just, yeah, Adobe Animate, CC. Yeah, you have the Creative Cloud, so Adobe Animate. Yeah, which used to be Flash, right? Or something. Whatever it is, they've kind of merged it all together, and there's plenty of, yeah, with the cloud you get it. So if it's something you like to do, yeah, you can definitely go and watch some Lynda and get started. And since it's Adobe, if you already know like Photoshop and stuff like that, and Illustrator, probably Illustrator, because I think it's a little bit more vector-based, right? That would probably help you get started sooner, or easier, I should say. Let's pull that down here. All right, so let's talk about good old Bob then. Faded away, what? Flash is getting faded away, Flash animation? Is that what you're saying? Yeah. Yeah, it's a neat genre and style and way to animate. But not quite sure what the industry's like out there with it. All right. See if I can figure out which one to open. Yeah, this is the one I started working on. See, now you're talking over my head. I don't know how that would have anything to do with HTML. Oh, probably just really. It's just security issues. So because the HTML, because it's how it's put out there, I guess, encoded. Interesting. All right, so good old Bob, here he is. So, so this is going to be a little different than the video. So hopefully I can kind of work on a different piece of reference and talk about mechanics and talk about the breakdown in there. So this is me kind of leading with my upper body, where the upper body is going to rock back and kind of throw itself forward, which is going to give me the momentum to shift my weight and pick up my leg into that first step, okay? Let's turn off the character a bit. Since this has animation in it already from a previous demo, let me kill it all. Okay. I should have left that open, shouldn't I? All right, I just have to play this again. All right, so this is what we're thinking about. So this is the connection again between why we're going to animate Bob for the change of direction before you animate your character, because we're going to be animating a much simpler character. We're going to be looking at that body and understand the mechanics of how it's moving through the steps we're taking, okay? How those hips and the upper body and the head work together to create your performance for next week, okay? So we're going to be looking at your reference, and we're going to be trying to create something in that wonderful Bob way, which is, hey, take a little bit of, the pressure off of having to handle a big, heavy rig and pose too many things, and key and break down too many things, and give us 3 simple pieces of geometry with 3 simple controls to create the same type of action, okay? Not to mention, too, I want you guys to not forget week 1 when we introduced you to Bob and we bounced Bob and we collided those pieces off each other, because that's what it's all about. It's about the idea that if you want to lead with something, just like you did with Bob. If I say I want the upper body to lead, well, then I'm going to anticipate, and I'm going to actually then get that moving first, and then I'm going to have the hips come up later, okay? And I want you guys thinking about that collisions, those collisions that were happening in the Bouncing Bob project, okay? So also the connection between, I like doing this in lecture better, it's easier because I physically get up and do this stuff too. But the connection between the walk, about taking a step, we can all relate that to what goes on in a step. You guys already know how you hop or jump, I should say, right? It's all about squash and stretch, right? Squash for anticipation, stretch to push off. It's also about slow in and slow out, right? For peaking, you know, and slowing in and then slowing out and accelerating in, what? Just to squash or to stretch and squash again, right? To land. When you think of your character taking a step, in order to come down, right? Or even in order to come up, maybe it's a matter of squashing and stretching to push off, peaking, right, into your step and slowing in and slowing out, falling to earth again and stretching in and then squashing afterwards and then bouncing back up again. So stretching out, slowing in again to the peak of the next step, okay? So we're really looking to be broad with that when we hop Bob, but your character is going to be doing a lot of that same stuff, okay, to create the weight of the step, okay, and that's what we're going to be looking to create here. Yeah, it's much easier to talk about this standing up. All right. All right, so obviously you guys should be working from a shot camera, so keep that in mind. One thing I guess I could point out too is with your character too, as much as you're stuck with a lockdown shot camera, you're not, the freedom you do have is to actually, the only time to use the main control curve is really to position the character, okay? So you can think about, like, once you've mapped out your steps, right? In your scene, if your character is maybe, what, too much on center, you know, and too far back or something like that, if you mapped out and we're using a shot camera and your action was all like this, you know, and he's so far away, you should check your cropping, you know, with the gate mask on. So if you turn this on, this will tell you exactly where your cropping will happen when you play blast it. So keep that in mind. And if you have all this wasted negative space, then your character, you know, even too, when your character comes forward, he ends up a little bit too much in center and you want him more like in the thirds or something, make your composition more interesting. Well, then just you take your main control curve and basically, you know, just reposition your character in frame and see if you can get him staged better for your performance, okay? And you're not going to key it and move it and key it and move it. You're just moving it once, and obviously all your poses will be adjusted that way. But at least this is a way that you can kind of frame him a little bit better and get him up nice and tight, or at least tight enough so he doesn't feel like he's too small to see and he is the main character in your scene, okay? And obviously you guys know the rule of thirds, you know, breaking up your canvas in threes, right? In threes in this way, you know, and just thinking about where your character lies and realizing that it's much more interesting to keep him around the thirds than to get him stuck in here, and maybe it's a little too much wasted space if you get too much off of the thirds, right? So just keep that stuff in mind and tweak your pose, well, your starting position, to help get them the strongest, you know, shot you can or composition you can, right? And staging. Obviously, you can even check the other, you know, cameras and see if you made the wrong decision, but at some point you should be animating with a specific shot camera in mind, okay? All right, so I already got like my starting position on Bob in here anyhow, so it kind of mimics what I'm seeing here. So I'm just going to turn off the character right now. I need my feet, so let's turn on the good old feet. Foot layer 2, guys, you're going to be showing those foot posts. So if they're off, you can just select them all and turn them on. You can do them at the same time, as you can see, just by selecting all of those and going to on. And I'll turn them all on. If for some reason you only have 4 steps and there's 2, I forget how many I put in there, 6 or 8. If you want to delete any of the ones you're not using to get them out of your shot, you can just go into the outliner and find them there. You'll just find that there is a folder, or group I should say, with the feet in them, and you can just open that up and find them, okay? And if you select them, you'll be able to, and I don't know if you guys know that about the outliner, whatever you select in the outliner, you'll find it highlighted here. So you'll see it's highlighting feet, foot group 2, left foot group. So that's what I have right here, the left foot group, okay? So that, you know, and then you just want to kill the whole group. That's the control, that's the pole, and that's the foot. So just get rid of the group if I wanted to get rid of that whole thing, okay? So just go in there and track down the feet that you want to kill and get out of your scene, and you can delete them from there, okay? But otherwise, keep what you're using, because that's part of your blockout. Requirements as far as for your play blast is to show the feet and the foot posts this week while you're working, along with your reference. All right. No, or you can do that, move them out of the shot. Yeah, whatever works to kind of keep your scene fairly clean. Alrighty then, so this is your work as far as spending a lot of time kind of like this, side by side of your reference and your character, and scrubbing through and going, okay, how does this action happen? How does my character get out of his first pose and take his first step, right? Scrubbing through here, I can see that obvious anticipation of leaning back, right? Rocking backwards before I rock forward, and then that leads me to pick up my leg into the first step, okay? So right there, I can just what I've been getting tighter than that. I know I'm gonna rock him back, rock him forward, and that's gonna allow him to take the step. But getting a little closer, let's understand why it's happening and how it's happening, okay? First off, since I'm leading with my upper body, right? And that's what happens here. The upper body swooshes forward, and look at that back left leg, foot. It doesn't really do anything besides start to kind of peel up a little bit there as it starts to come up. So that's again the idea that the body goes way forward and the leg stays behind. So I'm leading with the body, and then I get into the step, okay? So in order to throw my body forward like that, that's what this part is all about, okay? It's the rock as far as anticipating and pushing up the hips, which pushes back the upper body, and then pulling down and forward the hips in order to pull my body forward. So it's really kind of a whip action, right? Where I'm kind of pulling up to pull forward, and, you know, I'm pulling forward my hips and pulling my upper body forward that way to whip my body forward. Now what allows me to take the step to pick up my leg is something that happens just before the leg comes up. And that's what any of you guys kind of taking your step, you should look and find where the step starts to happen and scroll back and start to understand what the body is doing and what the weight is doing before in order to make that step possible. In this case, I'm already standing. I start with my weight on this leg, right? So without even like hitting roll, if I'm taking a step with this foot, I know I've got to do something to get my weight off of the leg I'm standing on in order to pick it up, okay? So when I scrub through, when the body comes forward, notice what happens as the body's coming forward. Also, now the hips start rolling forward too. So that's where it is. It's really the roll forward here is the main anticipation that I have to do before I pick up my leg. I have to rock my leg, my weight off of the leg I'm standing on. And it's also you're gonna notice I kind of arc. If you check the hips out, they kind of arc forward, down, and up into the step. That's my squash, okay? For Bob, Bob doesn't have any legs, so he has to, in order to go from this pose here and land on that first footstep, he has to jump. So for him, that's about where he's going to be squashing, right about that point, in order to push off, peak, and land on the footstep all the way over there, right? So that's where I'm going to be building Bob's squash pose, right? But also my character, and when you animate your character, if you're doing something like this, that's you'd be understanding that you have to build some sort of a squash and a weight shift here to go down and prepare and come off of that leg in order to pick it up and peek into your passing pose here and take that step, okay? So right there, I really have like 3 main ideas I know I'm going to be building. The the first anticipation here to rock backwards. There's really a pull here, but I can just say let's ignore that one and we'll take it right to the extreme of squashing him down, right? In that squash position before he pops up and picks up his leg. So let's just do 2 right now. I'll build the first anticipation and then really the main anticipation squash where the body rolls forward and we squash down, okay? So I'm just going to use the reference as my guide for the timing right now, and I'll change that as I get more and more poses in here and start to get it a little bit better and sort of check what it needs to do, okay? So I'll scrub by, and you can see that I rock back and things kind of slow in here. So I'm going to look for that point before as here he starts to come forward and say, yeah, right about here is where we slow in and have a slight pause here or slow in here. So I'm going to key it here. It's at 21. And now I can kind of tap through and kind of see how I'm going to create that change where I know the hip. You can see the hip pull up, kind of comes up into the left and it tilts the body backwards this way. And I probably even want to have a little fun tilting it more back this way, right? Actually, I might even want to do the opposite. I might tilt it this way because I want to actually open him up. It's more of an open pose. And I kind of think he's pointed more this way anyhow, so I'd like to turn him more that way. And then here the head is kind of tilted and looking more down that way. And it's a little bit tighter into the chest, right? So that kind of might work to sell that idea. Now to remember with Bob, we want to be animators, we want to exaggerate. So we're looking to encompass the ideas, right? We're not looking to recreate. So does that tell me, you know, obviously this is, if you're animating, if you're not doing stuff like this, you're just, why not? Don't stand there and just animate. Stand there and go, oh, I'm here, I'm here, here, here. And even when you do it, that's where you start thinking about how it breaks down. You realize, well, how do I rock back? Well, you just don't, your whole body just doesn't tilt back. How do you rock back? Well, let's say, what you can kind of see if I scrub through here a little bit slower, is that the hips start moving faster than the upper body. The hips kind of pop up here and start pushing up that way, but the head kind of stays a little bit slower. It doesn't go back that soon. That's because I'm driving up more with my hips. And what's leading here? The hips. So the hips are pushing up into the body. The body will crunch a little bit more this way before it rocks back and opens up over here, okay? So that's the kind of breakdown I'm going to build in here at some point, is break this down and have the hips push into the body and then open up into the pose I have here, okay? But I think that tells the story enough, okay, for now. So we'll let that happen. Now let's build that other squash, which is my main anticipation, to bring him way forward and squash him down, and that's going to hit about here at 34. So I'm going to key everybody here. And just to clean this stuff up, I'm going to get rid of probably just the rotates throughout the body. So I select them all, rotate them. And this allows me, because it's a much different kind of pose, I'm just going to rebuild this one and say, yeah, he is rotated forward with his body, pulling his body forward. His neck is cranked more this way, right? He's pointing this way a little bit, so let's keep that going. Here's where I can even use the what you call it, the graph editor to kind of help pose, which actually I should have checked my rotates here because I don't really have the rotates I want. At default, the upper body should be pointed more in this direction. So in this case, this would feel better if he was turned more this way, which makes me start changing my poses. So wish I had done that before I started posing, because now I have to repose this if I want to turn his upper body that way. But actually I can, if I want, and although his hips should be pointed this way too. Point his hips a little bit more this way. Actually his hips should be more here. And then actually his upper body is okay then, although it should be turned a little bit more. And this is what I mean about, like, just if you should start using the graph editor even just to repose, it makes using it much easier, okay? Be a little bit more tilt here. Okay, now I'm going to check this one out too. And here I really shouldn't be changing maybe the rotate on my hips. My hips should always be pointed this way, right? So I could probably keep these guys pinned this way. And then check the rotate on this. Yeah, let's keep that pushing maybe a little bit more, a little bit away, and then I'll take the head, kind of bring the head back more this way. That works good enough. And now let me check my last pose real quick as far as thinking about which way my hips are pointing. And that's the thing with Bob. This is an older rig of Bob before I reshaped the controls on here. You guys can see that on yours, I really took, this point and pulled it way out. And I think I even sort of squash these points a little bit more. Oops. In here. To just really kind of give you that point that says that's the front of Bob's hips, okay? And then he has this little square on his back, so you can kind of keep that in mind. That's the only thing that gets a little confusing with Bob, is making sure that you're pointing him in the right direction, okay? So here, when he squashes down, actually maybe that's a good idea to start turning him. So I'll take that as a good idea, where the hips start pointing more in that way. I'm just got my scale on still. Right, starts pointing more towards where he's going. So that works for me. Okay. In this case too, I really have that head rocking back and turning and looking. As far as where my hips are going, I want to feel them go down, and they do kind of squash down. But again, he's going to jump, so I'll make sure I get enough squash. He's going to start going to the left and forward too. So pop, pop. So that's my main squash, where my upper body's come forward. And I'm going to actually make sure that that neck, as you can see in my reference, now that neck is really jetting forward, right? It's not coming straight out of my head this way, it's jetting forward, which brings my head in front, so you get that, that, and that, right? So that's what I want to feel with him. The more you translate Bob's head forward, the more you get that idea of the neck being forward, okay? Which gives you a nicer line, and says that, right? This is also a squash, so you can decide to put your squash and stretch in with Bob. you know, while you're building it or as you start breaking it down and decide how you want to use squash and stretch, because he's Bob, so use the squash and stretch. The forward C already is what we call this here, is him crunching down this way and pushing his hips up. That's a squash in the front of the torso, right? So there's a squash. Guess what else is a squash? Taking his, bring his hips down means that his body is squashing, which is legs bending, and again, pretend he has invisible legs, and pulling down his upper chest, right, into the hips is squashing also. In this case, the head could be still dragging, but I want to kind of keep it low the way it is here. Yeah, let's add a little squash. I can always change it later if I want. So this might squash, and maybe even a little squash to the upper body, which allows me to even bring him down a little bit more, I think. And that's my squash. Okay. All right, so let's just try and kind of rough him out as far as to take that first hop or step, right? So now that allows him to come up, right, into the passing pose, which happens around here. So around 40, I'll build my passing pose. I'll key it, and this is where my character is going to come up, come over, right, and peak. I might want to get rid of my squash and stretch. This is like a bounce, right? So when the ball peaks, usually the squash and stretch is kind of done with for the moment. And as much as he's still kind of forward here with my reference, I want to loosen him up too, because as he's kind of squashing and push up here, he's going to squash. But when he peaks, maybe I want this stuff to loosen up a little bit. And maybe I open this up a little bit. Maybe I even translate this up a little bit more. Maybe the head rocks back and tilts a little bit more. So it's a little bit more, I don't know. I can get rid of the translates and put the head back to its default position. And I can even do that in the upper body just to kind of make him a little bit more relaxed. And say maybe a peak looks a little bit more relaxed like that. Check my staging here, right? Got my start pose, my first rock, anticipation, then my anticipation squash here, then my peak here. In this case too, I'm like, yeah, I still have some room here. Let's do that. Bring him over. That's him popping out of there. And in this case now too, now I'm going to build my landing, right? I'll come back and animate some more of this later and break it down. But now I want to land, and I'm landing in the contact, right? That's my foot landing. So the contact pose is going to represent your stretch in, right? That is Bob's stretch in, right? With the head, the abdomen, whatever. And I'm leading with the hip. And as much as the body's still forward, the hip comes down first, the leg comes down first. That means the body will drag behind a little bit, even though it's still arching forward. Okay, so key this, and then I'll take my character and kind of start putting him into place like he's going to land on that front step. So, okay, this is a stretch too. I want him pointing back in pretty much the direction here. I'm going to zero out the top bit of Bob, his head in that. This is going to drag a little bit anyhow, but not quite that much. Maybe the body is still up. The head is still kind of, the neck's still kind of forward, but maybe not as much, just a little. Because I still want it to feel like it's dragging a little bit, maybe like that. Want him to hit his mark, so let's see, this might come in, be about there now. Stretch this out. It stretches up, so that means I'm going to bring it down a little bit more. Maybe like that. Boom, peak, stretch in, and then it would be squashing. Now, I kind of purposely just didn't care too much about how I was translating him, because I like to kind of get you guys, again, thinking simply about the use of the graph editor and look at your translates. as you're building this and say, hey, he's coming forward in Z, he's coming to the left in X, right? So as you're building these poses, take a look at your progression. How is he coming side to side? Okay, side to side, if we look at it straight on, that's side to side. Keys going up, bring your character to the right. Keys going down, bring your character to the left. Okay, it's as simple as that. So this is your character starting off more to the right and jumping and going to the left. Okay, so from what you guys know about the jump, when you push off, that should be pretty fast, right? You should come out a little more linear, right? So that means coming out of your squash, when I push off here, I probably want to feel him come out of there a little faster, right? You can even see that the value change isn't much. It's really flat through here because he's not going to the left much. If I want him to be a little faster to come over and then fall a little bit straighter down like the jump would, I want my progression to look a little bit more like that, right? So you can sit there and see if you're not moving him that smoothly and just nudge him in the right direction. Obviously, if your timing is way, way off, if you've got like 200 frames or I don't know, 25 frames in between here, it's going to take him a while to get there. So that's not going to be a good gauge either. But if you're pretty much building it to your reference, your timing will be probably too fast, but it will be in the ballpark. You're making your animation broader, right? So you're moving your character farther. You're jumping your character instead of stepping over, right? And even two, notice how far Bob has to jump to take the step. How far did I have to move to take that step? Probably about half as far because you're sticking your leg out to get into the place. Where Bob's hips have to jump that far and land on the leg. So he's going to be, because of the jump, because of the distance traveled, he's going to move faster in the same time. So that's why, too, at some point you should break away from the timing of your reference and start thinking like an animator more and finessing this a little bit more, okay? Not to mention breaking it down like bouncing Bob, okay? But just looking at this, I want this to be faster and him to come over farther and then fall a little bit straighter down, right? Same thing with Z. If I look at Z, that's him coming forward, right? Again, as long as you put his landing contact in the right place, which visually it has to be, right? And we're starting back here, we know that once my character starts taking off, I want him again to start moving forward, and he doesn't. He just jumps more straight up and to the side now. But I need him to be pushing forward faster, right? So just pushing that up. And again, the idea is once you start even breaking these down more and more, you just keep this nice and tidy so your character moves smoothly, right? That's the idea of progression, just as you build, to just look at certain body parts, obviously looking at the core. That's what I ask you guys to start looking at, is the hips. And in your character is the hands. All the translates, you can look at this in the same way and try and push into a smoother sort of progression, okay? So things move properly at the proper speed and smoothly. And obviously my character would squash and bounce into the next one. Squash happens right after, right? So this would be my squash pose. Get squash these guys up. Bring him down. Sometimes switching to object mode on your translate tool is a good idea because it can pull this guy down, you know, in place. I can pull him straighter down here, and then squash. And if I rotate him and go back to my translate, you know, it's just sometimes it's easier to move your character in a certain direction if you do that, because the orientation can kind of help. So boom, here's my squash. At this point too, maybe the head is still dragging and starting to drag back with a slight tilt here too. Or you know, maybe it's about to hit, so it's dragging more. And it might even be stretching. Let's do that. So at some point, I want you to have fun too and think about what you know as far as things leading and following. And with the idea with Bob, if the hips come down, then the body comes down, and then the head comes down. So offset that a little bit, because that's really what's going to happen. Even if your character stays stiff like me and the upper body stays forward the whole time, on the way down, as I'm falling down, the body will slightly drag and then come down. And that's the idea of drag and overlap in your walk. So your character walks like this, right? That's what's going on there. I want you guys thinking about that and adding that. Boom. All right, so let's go back and break this thing down a little bit. I got at least the first hop in place here, right? Wait, what happens? Oh yeah, sorry there. Yeah, I got somebody behind me. When we start chattering, sometimes we're in competition. That's why I kind of talk a little low. I hope it's not too low for you guys. Try not to broadcast too much. We need like a dome of silence here or something. Okay, so that's kind of my quick little block out of saying, hey, this is how I get out of the first pose and take my first step, right? Main changes here, starting pose, an anticipation to prepare to pull my body forward, went right to the main key of a squash where the body's forward already. Didn't put my push off here yet. He has to jump. Actually, your character will need a push off pose too, because in order to pick up your leg, you want to start pulling your hips up first. And look at, that's what this is right here. It squashes, the foot rolls, but the leg doesn't come up until the body starts coming up. Actually, mine comes up a little quicker because I'm a little stiff through here. But again, if you're thinking like leading and following, you want your body to come up and then your foot to come up, right? So really that's the kind of idea that we're going to do with Bob here. And that's the whole idea too of jumping, right? Where you squash down and you're on your feet and push off, your feet are still on the ground. So this is really where I need to put a stretch to come out of here too, okay? But we'll get there in a sec. Let's break down the beginning part where I can start saying, hey, you know, even how do I go from here to here? First off, I don't start right off the gate. There's a little bit of a pause here. And then in order to pull myself back, this is what I was talking about before, I have my hips push up into my body and my body kind of drags. So there's more of this tilt going here first, and then this squash that happens more here, right? So you're going to get this crunch and this drag here before everybody opens up into the key back here, okay? So that's the main breakdown I see there. So before that happens, I'll just throw in a little sort of a slow out here, or a bit of a hold here to key it. And now I can start saying, okay, now when it starts to push back, I'm going to build like a breakdown around here, and I'll key it again, because I want this hip, right, tilting and pushing back into this. And this could, what, with Bob, it could be translating down to squash up and dragging a little bit, right? So we get a little bit more of the hip pushing up and then the body coming. I want this kind of coming up too, so pull him up and then back. So that's the idea of leading with the hip, right? And then pushing the body back into that. Let's see how that looks. Oops, in the shot camera a little bit. So a bit of a moving hold here, then the hips start pushing up and then the body rocks back, right? All right, so that's kind of simple. Now, with Bob, like I said before, in your Bouncing Bob project, I said, this is where I started you. I said, so say the hips were going to start this collision, you know, and they push the body and the body rocks back, right? Well, I want you to anticipate before those hips hit the body. So why not bring them slightly down or tilt them slightly and then tilt them and push them back up to hit the body to strengthen your action. So anticipate them. So look to do that with your bob animation. And I'm going to even show you that it's kind of going on here, but in a very subtle way. If you look at my hips just before they start pushing up here, they don't just push up in a straight line. They push up. Let's see if we get a, you know, if maybe just kind of do this and then do this. You know, they don't come up in a straight line. They come up in more of a arc through here. And it's a subtle one, but it is an arc. See it? And you guys know most things move in arcs, okay? So how you create arcs. Now, Maya's not going to give us an arc here. Let's get out of there. We're just going to feel the hips come up kind of straight, okay? If I want to arc them, I actually have to build something to help the hips arc around. Actually, what this really is, it's really an anticipation to come slightly down, and that creates our arc, okay? So thinking like I was saying, if I want to anticipate the hips before they come up, and let me just give a little bit more time between here and here. Close up my timeline a little bit so you guys can see what I'm working with. So this is the pose, and then the hips are going to push up. Now let's make that arc first, where I put a breakdown in here where the hips start to arc. So I'll key this again, and I'll say, hey, let's bring the hips slightly down and even over. And I'm even going to anticipate them with a squash, and maybe even a slight tilt this way, you know, and then to keep the body more quiet, I'll kind of keep it back, maybe even translate it slightly up so it stays more up. Let's see if I get a little bit of the hips. I don't see it enough yet, so I'm going to push it a little bit more. See if I can make it feel it that way, yeah. And I also want it to come slightly down too, because I want to feel a little bit of that arc. So more down will make it arc. So there it's coming down and then arcing up, right? Ba-doom, okay? You guys have probably heard somebody say at some point that anticipation strengthens your action, okay? This is, to me, how it strengthens your action. It starts to, first off, it contrasts, you know, the motion, you know, usually the direction, right? Even if it's just the tilt, if I'm gonna have my hand, you know, tilt this way, maybe I anticipate it this way to tilt it that way, and it kind of, you know, you get more of a crack or something like that. So sometimes it gives you the contrast you need. But in this case, it also gives me a little bit of contrast, but it helps create an arc for something to move a little bit smoother as opposed to just linear up and straight out, right? It gives it a slight slow out sometimes too, because it's usually a slightly slower motion, and maybe and like I said, in this case, it's going to help a little bit with the arcing. Boom. So there is the idea again of, if I'm going to have my hips start this action to push my character back, I'm going to anticipate them and have them come in and then push up. So even in here, since I'm squashing the hips down, maybe at this point too, what I might do is stretch them up. Again, like the idea of the ball stretching in to make that collision, it stretches up. And then even here, I could break it down further. And if I wanted to put like another pose here, to kind of key this. And this is where I might even, if I want to get a little bit more, this is where I can kind of squash these guys a little bit, get them a little bit closer, keep those hips kind of going up a little bit more, so I can try and get a little bit more of the anticipation, stretch, squash, and then everybody rocks back. So there's the collision idea, right? Ba-doom. Not just really working in here. Now I can sit there and try and work. If I'm happy with that, I can maybe get a little bit more drag on the head too, right? On the squash, I'll just keep the head kind of coming more down and tilting more like this too, and see if we can get a little more drag. Boom, 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 and then it opens up, right? That's that idea of like domino effect of collision, right? So that's kind of my goal here, is to get you guys doing that, looking at your reference, seeing how these, what are these actions, and then what you can gather out of this, and then what you really know, and what you can figure out. And that's all part of your job, is to figure it out, decide how you're going to create something that sells that idea. And that's what you're trying to do as an animator. You're trying to sell it, right? It needs to, you know, it needs to be believable that there's mass and weight, and something has that believability. Right now, the timing, I haven't really thought much about the timing. I'm just kind of making enough room, but I can kind of tweak the timing later. For me, I worry more about the changes, and then I worry about the timing and finessing from there, okay? All right, so that's really the first action. How do I go from my first main key to my first main anticipation? And that's using everything we've talked about this month, right? Got a burp, sorry. Must be third cup of coffee gets to you after a while. So unprofessional, I know. All right. So how do we go from here to here, right? And even here, I really kind of feel like I'm pulling my body down. So how am I pulling my body down? Well, my hips again, right? My hip drops and pulls down. And even too, I look at it and I go, oh, I'm coming through here. And then there's actually a little bit of something that pops. My foot comes down, my hip pops forward a little bit, and then starts to pull. And as I'm doing here, I just kind of feel like, you know, what I'm feeling here is this hip and this leg dropping here. And even though my upper body's coming forward, I just see this line in it. You can even see my head. It feels like it's distorting, right? You know, it's just falling into arc, and it's creating this arc because it's dragging, right? Because I'm pulling from my body. So this will drag my upper body, and then my upper body will whip forward, which will give it more power anyhow, right? So in this case, I want the body or the hips to come down. So I might even take a pose that's farther down here where the hips are pulling down more, and key that. I'll kind of even leave it where it is, that's fine. But here's where I'll just say, hey, you're not gonna catch up with me yet. You're gonna be dragging, right? And I'll drag this a little bit more so that I can keep the head more tilted like this, like it's kind of doing there, right? I might even then say this is pulling, so it's stretching. Since it stretches up again, I've got to counter it a little bit. I want it visually to be pulling down, so I'll do a little bit more of that. So I want to feel that, right? Boom, boom. And here's where I can do the same thing I just did before. The hip's about to start, right? Out of this pause, right? It comes up. Actually, I didn't pause it yet because I really could use a slow in here, which I didn't put in yet. So let's even do that. I'm going to go into my pose here, and I know it. There's a slight slow in here, so I'm just going to kind of pan. Actually, let me put that back. I'll keep the timing where it was. And here, I'll just make this all happen faster. So there's my anticipation. Then the hips are going to come up. I could probably make this happen a little faster. So let me even steal this. I'll just take a frame out of here at least, just so it comes up a little bit faster. And then I want it to hit faster, and you know, like a bounce or something might have that happen fast. So maybe even 2 frames for that. Pop, pop, right? And then it's going to open up. This will allow me then to slow in a little bit into this pause here. So here I'll take the in-between over here and move this back here, keep it moving through here and key this just to create a slight slow in here, right? And now here's where the hips will drop to start pulling the upper body forward, and the upper body will come down, okay? Now here's where, again, this is what I was saying here. Instead of having the hips just drop out of this pause, what I would like to do is just what I did before. Why don't I anticipate those hips and then pull with them, right? That'll make it stronger, okay? So here's where I'll maybe take, I'm gonna even take the pose where it is, just because I'm gonna keep it quiet. Move it over a few frames and key it here. And this is where, if I'm gonna pull down, maybe I'll squash it up this way, tilt it back like this, and I'll squash him in a little bit here because I'm going to pull those hips slightly up too, and see if that's a little bit of something before it drops, right? That same thing. Eat. Still feel a little bit more. So again, Bob, as you can see, he's very forgiving. Now, if I want to squash the upper body, see the upper body pulling forward, it's kind of like it's tensing up. I don't mind that, but it's pulling the head forward too, so I would probably want to at least drag the head a little bit now. So it drags maybe up like this. Before then it drops, boom, right? Okay, so it's the same kind of idea in these both moves, right? I'm going to anticipate with the hips, push them up, smack into the body, and pop back the head and the body, right? And then I'm going to anticipate again with the hips here and pull the body, and then the body will come down, right? And then here, I want it to whip through faster, so I'll probably just put maybe something here that pulls it here. I want him to get out of there too, so I might even see about moving this squash pose farther forward. Maybe I'll look at Translate X and say, yeah, oh, that's an interesting discussion. Let's say I haven't really cleaned up my progression here, and this is what kind of happens when you're animating and you see, once you get in here, you go, well, wait, why do I keep changing direction left and right, left and right, left and right? I don't know if that makes any sense, does it? Probably not. When you actually bend down, right, your hips kick back this way. So the squash, I am bending down, right? So actually, probably even the squash, I'd probably in Z, I could probably, this is the great thing about Bob, he has no feet or legs, right? Feet or legs or hands. So if you move his hips, you're not gonna lock anything out, right? So if I decide, hey, when he squashes down, wouldn't it be good to bring his hips back in space? I can just design that right here and say, yeah, let's do that. Okay. So then even if I'm looking at here, maybe when he opens up this way, kind of like that, maybe that's why these hips can come slightly forward. And then I'm going to start to anticipate. So yeah, maybe they would kind of drop a little. And then here they're going to drop down first. Maybe I'll just keep them quiet or even flat. Maybe be a good idea. I keep them flat here. And then he'll pull forward into that, and then his hips will tuck back there before they start coming forward as he pushes off. Even here, maybe then I can calm that down a little. Pop and go, all right? So I look at the Translate X. This is the one where I was wondering why I had too many reversals through here. So this is the side to side, right? So looking at this, let's make sense of this one, right? Characters here, not much movement, right? All of a sudden he's gonna come back down. That's the anticipation. So even the anticipation, maybe I hold him more quiet or even go the opposite way to the right. I think I'll just hold this one again quiet for that. I think I do enough with the other tilts in the Translate. And then it's gonna start to come up. Why does it, when it starts to come up, it comes, you know, to the left farther here. The more I pull this down, the more he comes to the left. So what's the sense of him going farther left and then right and then left again? So why not just, because it's a slow out anyhow, so. Or no, it's not really. but might as well keep it smooth. It doesn't make sense to change it. Unless for some reason I wanted this to push more to the left here, which I don't think I do anyhow. Boom. Actually, that might be an interesting thing, just to hold this more quiet through here. So after the hit, it's going to pop up to the right and then kick out more to the left here to have that hip kick out to the side. Boom, right there. Pop to the left, right? And then here's my anticipation. So I don't mind this reversing once again and coming to the right for this anticipation. As long as there's a reason for it and it happens in a fairly smooth way, I'm okay with it. But then I'm going to reverse here and here again, so let's see why. This is me coming down, or I should say to the left here, coming over it here, which is my pull to stretch down. But then I rock to the left here, and actually that kind of works to pull my character over here, and then to roll back here and pull my body in. So actually that's a good build. That kind of just happened. Serendipity, you know, as far as building this thing. And I don't mind that because it helps with the roll of pulling the upper body forward, right? And arcing the hips around and down into the squash pose, which they're going to fall back like I just created, okay? So I'm okay with that. As long as it makes sense, you know. But that's the idea of coming in here and just getting rid of what you don't need to, or smoothing out what you shouldn't. Even in here, it's like, what's the sense of just leaving this and this and this? Why not just say, you know, this is going to be a minimal tweak just to do this and keep that smoother? Or is it too that maybe this needs to move a little farther just so it smooths out here? You know, that smooths out your movement. If you just get used to doing that, and you're going to see sometimes it's minimal, and it usually is just a minimal tweak on your pose, and it's like, it's worth it to keep it smooth, okay? You get used to just trusting the Breath Editor that smooth transitions mean smooth movement, okay? All right, where was I with the breakdown 2 then before I started checking to see how smooth or not I was? Boom. I was going to actually come from here to here as I come into my squash. And this is where I come down, and I'm going to continue to break this thing down where I'm stretching with my hips. And then at this point, I might break it down a little bit more, just put another one here where the hips then get pulled down even. I mean, the upper body gets pulled down more. And it's trying to kind of roll more forward, tilt a little bit to the left, and the head still back here maybe. This is where too I kind of want to, maybe this is where, you know, I want to push the idea of trying to arc. And if you can see the reference, you can see my head kind of really dips and pulls out there, right? So it's like this kind of squash that happens in here, and even squashing the head, so it kind of arcs and then opens up. And that's kind of my interpretation of something feeling like that, right? What I don't feel yet is the push off, because I don't have my stretch to jump, right? Which is the body coming up before the foot comes up, right? So in this case, you know, I want them to come up fast, so I might take a faster, you know, 37, middle mouse it back really into here. This is where I want to push off, so the leg's still stretching out. It's going to be down, and it's going to be pointing in this direction, right? As it pushes off. And I'm going to have to counter rotate my character, even though he's still kind of slightly bent that way. But I want to do that, and I want the hips to stay down, and be stretching and being left behind, and I want this guy pulling up. The head's up and all, but I'll tighten it up a little bit and even get a little bit of drag on it, okay? And I might even push it and squash it into the head like this. The more I do that too, the more I can actually now take it and pull it up this way, get a little bit more of the push into the head and the hip staying behind, and then the hips can catch up, right? And that's him picking up his leg to take the step, right? And you can see the offsetting with the hips, where the hips come down and lead, right? And then the body bounces and then pulls up, and then the hips come up after that, right? What I'm not feeling really is the drag enough. It's probably because I need to break this down more. I put the squash here. The squash needs to happen a little bit further down here. I really want to feel more of the drag, and probably by breaking this down one more time, even like I want to zip the head through, and I want the head to feel like it is going to pull through there. So maybe really kind of pulling now with the body and leaving the head behind here. Can I get a little bit more of the, I have the hips coming down, and I'll have them start to tug on the body a little through here, see? And then I'll have the body come down and start to tug on the head. And then the head comes down and squashes and bounces through, right? And then the head jets out. Even here, does the head need to jet out farther? Probably, if I really want to sell this, right? So that might even be a squashing more over here. So I feel the head pop and then start to pull the body. And if it's starting to pull the body, does it start to pull the torso here, right? Boof, and then the torso comes up, right? So it could be broken down even more, but hopefully you guys get that idea.
That's what I'm saying. Motion change. That one probably have like 2 to 3 keys. A lot of crazy action.
All right. So who's out there? You got 6 of you guys out there? All right. So questions? Does that sort of point out hopefully some good things? You know, like I said, none of this is specific to any of what your guys are doing. So that's the idea. Again, it's about getting you to think in that pose-to-pose mindset and slow down and think about the offsetting of leading and following between this, you know, and then, you know, how do you then take this next week? You know, if you've done this and you can break your character down like this with this simple character, you can do that with your character's body parts. And now you've really got somebody moving fairly well, okay? Obviously, it's more complicated too because you have to orchestrate your hands and your feet to this action too. But at least you understand the mechanics of the action, okay? Okay, feet. You want me to talk a little bit about the feet? Oh, the feet stilt part? Confusing? What do you mean by stilt? Oh, okay. All right. You mean by, yeah, so this makes sense with the feet stilt as far as how you're using them? Okay. There's a video too that where I go over really just the idea of cleaning this stuff up, which is actually, I think, fairly good to kind of get in there and think about cleaning this up. All this stuff, again, you can just start looking at, you know, even this, like when he jumps up here, you know, I could probably push that just a little bit more so he gets out of there fast enough. You want that hang time, right? Even coming down, you know, you want to make sure he accelerates in. You could be breaking tangents, offsetting stuff a little bit more, and having fun after you've gotten it broken down as much as this, you know. But you could break it down further. You could really get in there and make sure that you're stretching exactly when you need to, you're squashing when you need to, exactly need to, and if you need to add extra keys to do that, all that is all game, okay? Really, you're going to set yourself up for success for next week the more you slow down and break this guy down and offset these parts and relate it obviously to what you're seeing in your reference here, okay? Where this can get a little harder is I reopened this and have a version of it where I think it started to break it down a little bit more. If I go back to what was in there, I got a little bit farther breaking this part down. So let's go foot bob in this and the reference, okay? So in this part too, where my character is starting to change direction, you're gonna see even coming through this landing here, he squashes, bounces, comes up and turns, and then he starts leading with the leg here, which is this contact pose now. As he turns, the body starts slowing down, stretches in, falls, squashes, bounces up. Now too, when your character bounces up, and in this case, look at the reference where I just kind of almost pause, and then I pick up my leg and take my step here. So that's a really long bounce, right? Well, you can defy gravity, that's fine. Or if you want to, however you want to try and decide if you really wanted him to bounce. I suggest that, yeah, you bounce and settle on the posts, but I suggest you just bounce him and kind of hover him and pretend he has, you know, an invisible leg that he's paused on just like he is here, right? Now, what you do next is you can see I started to do it here. I don't think I finished it up though, where I'm about to kick out my leg and lead again with my hip. So you're going to see that I'm pulling up my leg here and my hip to then take the step. So there it is, me anticipating out of that pause with the hip, and then the hip kicks out. Well, starts to kick out. I don't quite know what I was doing there, to be honest with you. Well, that's me kind of pulling up the hip and then starting to kick out the hip. Actually, the hip needs to kind of probably start moving, and this needs to be dragging back here, so we get a little bit more of that sort of pull and then kick, right? And then I don't know why we I don't like that, but this pose could be used maybe falling more here. Actually, I don't like this pose. Boop, let's get rid of it. With the idea of kind of anticipating out of that pause and then starting to fall into this. Let's even this pose. Delete this. The idea is to anticipate and then to stretch in here. And in this case, I want to build it more like this. Let's call that my stretch. Get rid of my squash here. Not even sure why this isn't pointing in that way. Get this a little closer to something that resembles a stretch in here where I'm leading. And again, the idea here is how do we handle, you know, this idea? For me, it was a slight anticipation where the hip pulls up. In this case, the head might tilt that way as it drags. Then we have the anticipate. Oh, you know what it was? I think I needed a pause here. Where's my pause? Boom, boom. There's a bit of a pause. Anticipate. And then I have a bit of a kick. I think that's what I had here, where it was more of a reversal, where this would kind of start kicking out this way, which would have this start to drag more that way, and then the head would start to drag more this way. All this kind of starts to fall down a little bit more. That's why I guess I had this slight tilt. So just trying to start to mimic a little bit of what I'm seeing there about anticipating, kicking out that leg, and then the body following it down and then squashing into that. I guess the squash would come later. I didn't have that in there yet, but boom. Okay, so that's the thing that might get tricky for some of you guys in the turns. If you get a bit of a pause, you know, you can just think very sort of cartoony and slow him in to a held position, anticipate, in this case with the hip. And even there, I think I put those other poses in there to start describing a turn also, with the anticipate, pull, kick out, stretch, and then contact, you know. And this is what I was even saying in like lab today, when I talk about poses and I'm scrubbing through or acting something out, I'll stop and I'll name what these are doing for me, right? So here, when we come in, we stretch in and we squash down and we stretch out and we slow in and pause, or just slow in a little bit here, and then we're going to anticipate and rock back, right? And then we're going to push off and forward, and then we're going to stretch out, and then we're going to fall into the contact. And those would be all poses that I would be building to suggest how we fell into that next step or that next hop, okay? And actually what I put in here was, in order to get Bob out of there, I probably had an anticipate, which is really this push here to push out, you know. So you'd want more of a squash, and then a push, and then a stretch, and then a fall, okay? Boom, boom, boom. I bet you that's what I was kind of doing when I was talking about it the last time I did it. But how you go about and figure this out, you know, there's a lot of ways to describe it and sell it. And there's never just one answer, and there's never just one solution, and there's plenty of ways to do it right and plenty of ways to do it wrong, okay? So, which makes this hard, right? Yeah, you know, if you want to touch the post, you can. If you want him to skim over them, the idea is they do represent, you know, a bounce. So for me, I tend to use them more just like the idea. You can see here, he does bounce on and roll on something and then pop off, okay? But it also depends on the step. Like what you can be doing too, and you should be doing, is we want to see your creative artistic take on the actions, right? So as much as that he needs to hop, not every hop has to be the same type of hop, right? You know, if I'm taking a slick, quick step, well, you don't have to bounce your character like that, right? You can kind of bounce them like that, where it's just a quick kick to the side and the hip kicks out and you zip onto it, and that's a hop, right? You zip over to the right. or if your character comes, or if I take a step where I come and I go ba-dum, like that, and there's a lot of squash and stretch and I hit really hard, well, that's one you probably want to treat like a big, heavy hop, right? And then if I take another one that's just a quick little or side step, maybe it's a much more subdued little zip over there that feels like a, just something more sleek, okay? Yeah. Yes, use your best judgment and how you're going to interpret it. I would say go for that, texture as far as not everything feeling the same. Don't just do the same hop the whole time, because then you're probably just using a formula, how to hop something or jump something, when I want you to be stealing ideas and understanding about what's leading here and how you can pull that off. Yeah. Even here, I interpreted that a different way. Well, all right, guys, so hopefully that was a bit of an overview. And then I think, yeah, there's the 2 videos specifically on Bob where I animate one of the examples and then I clean up one of the examples, so that can help you also too, okay? Okay, cool. Shoot, Stephanie. If you want to unmute yourself, you can do that too if it's easier. I feel like we should just talk anyhow. After a while, it gets a little weird talking to yourself. Yes. Exactly. So next week is spring break. So we kept the same turn in for Sunday night, which is probably good. You guys can kind of push for that and turn it in, and then take the break to recoup, and then jump in and kind of finish up your scene after that.
Can I just use that week to just do all of the extra credits and just throw them in a folder?
I'm sure if you want to do that, just turn them in with your final turn in. We will just give you credit. Well, I'll give you credit like right in those same milestones that they live. So you can do any of the exercises at any time. If you wanted, yeah, you could have been doing them the whole time and just turn them in at the end. You'll still get the points put somewhere, whether it's in milestone 1, 2, 3, or 4. Whatever week they were in, we'll put those in that. Okay.
Oh yeah,
So I'll update your grading sheet with that. Yep. No, Nick, we have a break next week, and then we come back and finish the last week of class. Okay. Yeah, it's just the way things get scheduled. They're not ever that neat and tidy. They usually break up the month instead of breaking up the months with breaks. They break up the month of class. I don't understand it either. All right, cool. So, all right, guys, try and have fun with Bob. Get creative. Get control. Break them down. Offset. Collide. Lead and follow. Anticipate. All that good stuff. All right. I'm going to hit the record.